families lived through that painful period of history 60 years ago, it has special meaning. Armenian people were totally, systematically exterminated because they chose to honor their heritage instead of oppressive forces which sought to rule them. The genocide of Armenians has faded from public memory for several reasons, primarily because it happened on the other side of the globe 60 years ago. But because of this film, the suffering, the atrocities, the moral message cannot be forgotten. We must not allow it to be forgotten.
In 1915, Turkey attempted to destroy the Armenian people. The goal was to wipe out an entire ethnic group by a plan that included massacre, deportation, and starvation. In city after city, the Armenians perished. Over 1.5 million people met with death. Some Armenians survived this first genocide of modern times. They scattered to all parts of the globe and began to rebuild. My parents were among them. Throughout my life, I have heard stories about these terrifying events, about which the world has forgotten.
Our present thrust is that knowledge of the facts and the truth of the Armenian Genocide, deliberately planned and perpetrated by the then Turkish government, which left tremendous lasting scars upon the hearts and minds of millions of Armenians who today talk about it, who today have relatives they remember and they weep over.
And even though none of my relatives were involved in it, I still identify it very closely from the standpoint of an emotional feeling against the Turkish people and really against the American people to the degree that the people in power in this country really didn't do anything to put a stop to it.
The fact remains that, of course, in 1915, there were about over 2 million Armenians in Turkey. And at the end of the second year or third year, in 1916-17, there were less than 150,000. What happened to these people? They did not disappear, vanish from the earth.
These now silent and desolate highlands of Western Armenia were once the productive home of the Armenian people. Throughout history, be it in bondage or exile, Armenians have possessed a deep attachment to their land. The Turks now till the soil in this stern land beneath lofty mountains. The land Armenians were forced to abandon over 60 years ago. Biblical traditions hold that Noah's Ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, round whose base Armenians have lived continuously for 3,000 years. Mount Ararat is close to the Armenian heart. It is the symbol of Armenian nationhood. When you see the snow-capped peak, you know that God will deliver the Armenian people. I believe that one day Mount Ararat will belong to us again.
I
have no doubt at all that they have a completely valid moral claim to the Armenian highlands. They had occupied that territory for well over 1,000 years before the Turks came into it. They continued to live side by side with the Turks, and they left it purely and simply because they were driven out by force. I can't imagine a clearer moral claim than that.
The historical Armenian homeland is situated at the crossroads of 3 continents. It occupies the region between the Black, Mediterranean, and Caspian Seas. 500 years before Christ, the Armenians had taken form as a distinct nation from the plain of Ararat to the headwaters of the Euphrates, to Lake Van. It is this land that the Armenians claim as their own. Because of her geographical location, Armenia has always been a buffer between East and West. She transmitted ideas and cultures between the continents. Constant struggle created a nation of warriors. Armenian kingdoms grew in power and size until under Dikran the Great in the 1st century BC, Armenia became the dominant power in the Middle East. At the beginning of the 4th century, the Armenians were the first people to accept Christianity as the state religion. An alphabet was invented, and a golden age began, lasting for almost 200 years. Within the pages of ancient manuscripts, miniature paintings depict the high level of Armenian civilization in literature, art, and architecture. After centuries of warfare, the Armenians established in the 10th century another kingdom with its capital at Ani, a city of 1,001 churches. Illustrated chronicles and the remaining structures provide a glimmer of the splendors of Ani. To Van and beyond, there remains today the handiwork of Armenian architects and craftsmen standing in a landscape empty of Armenians. From the Asian heartland, Turkish armies moved westward across the rolling hills of Armenia, conquering all peoples in their path. 5 centuries under the Turkish rule that followed were the darkest in Armenian history. In the 1890s, Sultan Abdul Hamid became alarmed by the breakup of the Turkish Empire by European powers. The Armenians, although a subject people, retained their national consciousness as they continued to live on their historic territories. They refused to be assimilated. By the 20th century, many subject nations had attained freedom from Turkey. At the beginning of this century, Turkey, now reduced in size and power, decided to unite all Turkic peoples, but found that the Armenians in her midst blocked pan-Turkish expansionist dreams eastward. Turkish leaders then decided on a policy of extermination, of genocide, using as a pretext the religious and economic differences between Turks and Armenians.
The Turkish people as a whole, the common man, was not interested in technical advances, in education. The great landowners were wealthy. The mass of the people were either small shopkeepers or farmers. The Armenians had always been avid for education. The manufacturers, the great business firms, the productive people of the country were Armenians. And here they were, the cultured people, the educated people of the country, were the minority and supposed to be subservient to the rulers.
The Turkish leaders feared that someday the Armenians would also seek freedom. On the eve of the genocide, the Armenians of the city of Harper, as Armenians throughout the Turkish Empire, were a law-abiding people. Despite discrimination and persecution, the citizens of Harper went about their daily tasks. They did not suspect that within a month, most of them would perish at the hand of Turkish assassins. Among them were my grandparents. In 1915, the city of Van stood prosperous and proud. Years of Turkish tyranny had failed to break the spirit or the unity of her inhabitants. Within a year, the Armenians of Van also would be engaged in a life and death struggle. In the countryside, persecution and oppression continued as the order of the day. The Turkish government joined Germany and the Central Powers during the First World War. As world attention was diverted on the war, the Turkish government undertook the systematic extermination of the Armenians. First, the Armenians in the Turkish army were disarmed and placed in slave work battalions.
As my grandfather related the events of 1915 to me many years later, at the time when he was Woodrow Wilson's ambassador to Turkey, his dealings were primarily with Talat Pasha, who was the Minister of Interior. And there was just no question, there was no question in my grandfather's mind that the extermination of the Armenian people was a calculated policy of the Turks.
Enver Pasha, Minister of War, Cemal Bey, and Talat Pasha formed the ruling group which ordered the genocide. Coded cipher telegrams were sent to all governors of the provinces reading, "The government has decided to destroy completely all the Armenians living in Turkey. All Armenians from 5 years upward are to be taken out of towns and slaughtered."
I was there at the time of the deportations. The deportations, according to what the German missionaries from that area told us, were ordered by the Turkish government. They said it had been revealed to them by German government officials that these deportations were necessary to remove all minority groups from Turkey.
Beginning on April 24th, 1915, on secret government orders, the Armenians were arrested and forced out of their homes on the pretext that they were being moved to a non-military zone. Along the way, they were slaughtered.
Up in the hills there, you could see hundreds of bodies from distance. And then at night, when the wind was strong, you could just smell the corpse.
At night, they were coming and searching and looking around to get beautiful girls, young girls, and all, to rape them, right before the mother's eyes. Our parents buried us into the sand, covered only my head out. The time that I escaped, and then I picked up the knife, and I hid it to the Turks that's coming near to me. I don't know if the Turks got died or not, but that I did it for my protection, you know. They came to grab me.
And I'd see women, and children, and men lying beside the road, dying of thirst or hunger, and I could do nothing for them. The commissary of police wouldn't let any help to be given to them.
As an officer of the Turkish army for the wounded soldiers, I had no difficulty to enter the camps, and I make many photographs. Here is a photograph where you see Armenian priests to make the grave for the dead. And I remember that one of these priests said to me, once I was a priest, and now I am a lamb who is gone to be killed.
The Armenian Genocide took place against the people in their own historic homeland. The world powers knew it was happening, yet allowed the massacres to run their course. Large portions of the Turkish people participated, yet today Turkey continues to deny that these acts took place. A cover-up of the facts continues. They showed us many dead bodies and threatened to kill us also if we spoke the Armenian language and remained Christians. Out of deathly fear, we stopped being Armenian. We were only small boys when the Turks killed our parents.
Hayırın saf hat çur yapıp desa martım misi veren gıtılar ki hayırın pargayı.
Jandarma mesela asbest. Cevap şunu kınasını çek arasın. Jandarmalar güle kanalda.
When the soldiers finished shooting, nobody was left alive.
The orders came for the massacre to begin on a certain date. For 3 days, the massacre was carried on. Then word came that it was to stop, and the Armenians were told that if they would disarm and hand in all their arms, everything would be quiet and there would be no more trouble. Well, they were in such a situation, there wasn't anything else they could do. They did, and then word came through the massacre was to go on again.
In another instance, he talked with Talat about a particular Armenian and said to Talat, I believe this man is not an enemy of the Turks. This man is friendly to the Turks. And Talat's answer was, no Armenian can be a friend of the Turks after what we have done to them.
I saw many refugees and dead bodies. People were being tortured and raped. We fled to the mountain to Musul'a to defend ourselves. We could no longer live under Turkish oppression. It was now freedom or death. We fought them hard. We forced the Turks to retreat. This battle gave Franz Warfel the inspiration to write his famous novel, 40 Days of Musul'a. Stranded atop this mountain and against tremendous odds, these Armenians fought off the Turkish armies until rescued by French warships.
Atma Kaye Gretsin ինքնաբաշխանությունը չարնագել 3 շաբաթ մաս պայմանով որ գիներնան հետը մեկդեր շատ գինգար որ բզդիկը կիրկը
Armenian women fighting side by side with the men held off the Turks for 3 weeks. The Turks started the shooting. Only after we realized that the Turks were massacring the Armenians elsewhere did we decide to defend ourselves. The swiftness of the Turkish onslaught destroyed most of the Armenian people before they could defend themselves.
The difference after 1916 was that the historic lands of Armenia, the lands of Van, of Mush, of Sasun, of Erzurum, of Sepastia, of Kharper, these lands were swept clean of the people that had lived there since the first millennia BC. In a few years, there will not be alive a single Armenian who was born on and who can remember the historic territories that his people inhabited for 3,000 years. And herein lies, I think, the crux of the Armenian question. What is to happen as the result of the expulsion and destruction of a people from its own historic territories? A people whose whole history was girded and built in this territory.
As an Armenian who is 3 generations removed from the massacres, I don't think my strongest feelings are those of sorrow or pity. Certainly I feel sorrow and pity. But I think what I feel most strongly is anger and frustration. Anger at the realization that one group of people, one government, was able to carry out successfully the fate of not only 1.5 million people who were killed, but of countless others who have had to live under conditions not necessarily those of their own choosing.
The numbers of Armenians were staggering too. I mean, what's the difference between 2 million and 6 million? Can you picture 2 million?
I'm just saying, more attention was focused on that area. That's why I think it's more remembered.
But then, if you look at New York Times, everything, every day there was something about the Armenian massacres. Armenian girls sold into slavery, girls taken to harems, children killed, bludgeoned, you know, all sorts of things. The world was shocked at that too, but they forgot it easily. You know, who's to say if Germany after the war had, you know, not done anything, we wouldn't forget the Jews today. What we're saying about Hitler, you know, after he ordered death units to start working in Poland, he said, after all, who today remembers the Armenians, the extermination of the Armenians? The world believes in success only. And when you leave something like that unanswered, I think Hitler puts that question very clearly before us. I think that for humanity's sake, we have an obligation to make the world remember and for justice to be done. Not just for Armenians.
When you represent so many Armenians from a particular district, you become interested in their culture and their background and the history of their country. And I heard of what transpired in 1915 I spoke before an Armenian youth group last year, and during my remarks I said no genocide can be condoned by the United States. Turkish delegation of the UN has maintained that the paragraph would express undue bias. It makes reference to the 1915 Armenian massacre, and I argued that unjustifiably biased if it does not include the Armenian genocide. There's no such a thing as a balanced position on genocide.
Now, I think it is extremely important to point out that in the case of the Turks, they have, since 1915, followed a deliberate policy to distort the historical facts. To begin with, they have denied that a genocide or a policy to exterminate the Armenian population of the Ottoman Empire was ever carried out.
And the very fact that the world reaction to that genocide 60 years ago wasn't as effective as it should be certainly laid the seeds for the terrorism and the other acts of bitterness against peoples that have been perpetrated since then.
I would like to suggest that had the civilized world reacted vigorously to the Turkish policy of genocide during World War I, it is entirely conceivable that the Nazi policy of exterminating the Jews in Europe may not have happened.
In many lands, the Armenians have erected monuments to remind the world of Turkish crimes against humanity. On April 24th of each year, Armenians gather to commemorate the forgotten genocide. Throughout the years, the Turks have made no attempts to rectify injustice. Future Turkish governments must consider the Armenian claims moral, legal, and territorial. Crimes against humanity have no statute of limitations. The Armenians are determined to pursue their case against Turkey until the civilized world recognizes that inhumanity and injustice, unchecked, are a threat to all people.
Tonight's special program has been brought to you through the courtesy of Montebello Federal Savings and Loan Association, located at 615 West Beverly Boulevard in Montebello, serving the San Gabriel Valley and eastern Los Angeles County. Montebello Federal offers you the highest rates of interest on your savings account. You'll be treated with